boys are more likely to play video games, and people think boys don't have body image issues. And so that's really prevented there from being a ton of research in this area. But the few studies we have do suggest that these avatars are kind of problematic, in that just like action figures that young boys play with, they're just so muscular, they're so big, they do not look like real people that we'll ever meet in our lifetime, probably. And they suggest to boys that this is what's important.
Welcome to the Healthy Screen Habits Podcast. I'm Hillary Wilkinson. Whether you're starting your parenting journey with a newborn or looking to connect with your teen on technology, let's learn some new healthy screen habits together. This season, we're taking a deep dive into social media and exploring how to create the healthiest habits to enjoy using it productively, as well as gain tools that will help put up some of those guardrails that some of us need surrounding the use of it. As a professor of psychology and director of the Health Sciences Center at Rutgers University, my guest today is uniquely qualified to talk about the effects social media is having upon our youth's developing self-image. For 25 years, she's been doing research, examining eating behaviors and body image. Her latest book is called Being You, the Body Image Book for Boys. Published in 2022, it's a book that takes into account not just the physical changes that happen during puberty for boys, but also in the influence that social media has had upon the development of many young men's self-images. So, of course, I was super intrigued. This is the time of year that many parents are getting hit with puberty questions, especially our middle schoolers are coming back, or maybe that uncomfortable stage of, you think the puberty questions should start coming, but nothing is happening. So this book was too good not to share. Welcome to the Healthy Screen Habits Podcast, Dr. Charlotte Markey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Charlotte, I'm intrigued to know what brought you to write this book. You previously wrote the Body Image Book for Girls, and why did you feel the need to do a version for boys?
It's interesting because people seem to be surprised that boys have these concerns. And yet I was talking with my editor about the version for boys as soon as we started talking about the book for girls. So it was really always in the works, always being planned. And we know that boys' body image concerns, they manifest differently than girls, but they're really just as prevalent. And the main reason to separate and have more than one book is just because we do talk about puberty in the books and some physical development issues, and because there are some different issues. There's a lot of overlap, though, too, actually.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful to see more. I feel like there are more and more books coming out that are boy specific, because I can tell you when my son was, entering these new stages, it seemed like there's a big niche that's been covered for girls, but not so many of these really good resources for boys. So thank you. It is definitely needed. Now, I'd like to explore this term body image. So you hear it being tossed around. I feel like there's no one better for you to define it. Could you explain to us what is body image?
The sort of technical definition would be our thoughts and feelings about our bodies. But I think that that's somewhat incomplete and actually paints a more superficial picture of what body image is than is actually true, because our body image really affects how we interact with other people. It affects our health behaviors, how we're eating, how we're exercising, and a variety of other things we might do to try to shape how we appear. And it's really highly associated with just mental health in general. And so when people think about body image, I think they all too often think about an adolescent girl who's really concerned about what she's wearing or her weight. But really what we mean as psychologists is just sort of how do we feel in our own skin? Are we comfortable with ourselves? It's
Okay.
really sort of a broader mental health variable.
Okay. And so it kind of expanding on that, how important do you feel the role or how is social media affecting kids' body image? What's the role that you see it playing?
I mean, our kids are on social media a lot,
Mhm.
and I'm sure your audience is well aware of just the hours per day that the average tween and teen may be on social media. And so it's a pervasive influence. We really can't pretend that it's not relevant. Um, it's omnipresent. And we know that for the most part, it's not a positive influence on body image or mental health more generally. But what's I think really important to say is that it doesn't have to be a negative influence, really. I think it's really about what do we do with social media? What do we do on social media? And that's where we really need to focus because we're not going to get rid of social media. It's not going
Right.
anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, I found it really interesting. You include this small portion in the book. I mean, I know we're supposed to be focusing on social media, but I wanted to talk about this part too because I thought it was really interesting. You include this small part about the role of avatars in video games and body comparison with boys, and I found this to be really interesting partially because honestly, because we at Healthy Screen Habits are typically contacted by parents of children who identify as boys who are much more concerned with video game usage than social media use. The social media use typically trends more heavy towards use by teens and tweens who identify as girls. And so that being said, how do you see video games affecting self images of kids who identify as boys simply because this is the body book for boys is why I'm asking that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we think of video games as potentially being a negative influence when it comes to like boys' aggressive behaviors, right? And that's not really my specialty so much. But we know that research also, I think, presents like a pretty muddled picture of what may be going on. And there's not as much research looking at body image in video game use because boys are more likely to play video games and people think boys don't have body image issues. And so that's really prevented there from being a ton of research in this area. But the few studies we have do suggest that these avatars are kind of problematic in that just like action figures that young boys play with, they're just so muscular. They're so big. They do not look like real people that we'll ever meet in our lifetime, probably. And they suggest to boys that this is what's important, right? Having these muscles, being strong, being tough, being aggressive. All of that is part of masculinity. And I think that people are surprised to realize or to even consider, maybe we need to counter those messages or talk to our boys about choosing different avatars, even spend less time with these unrealistic avatars. Of course, spend less time with video games would be nice too, but sometimes you have to go for
You've got
the
to,
realistic fix.
I was going to say, meet them where they're at, and
Right,
see,
exactly.
we're all working together towards this. But
Yeah.
I like that idea. I like that idea of experimenting with different avatars, choosing different character types, body types, and seeing that, I don't know, that you can achieve the same things,
Right,
regardless
right.
of. No, I think that's fantastic.
It was
Okay.
really funny for a while. My son, um, he's almost 17 now, but when he was a little bit younger, we talked to him and he was playing with female avatars. And I kind of thought that was like an interesting way to be like, no, don't pick these big, bulky men. Like, see what tough women can do.
Yeah.
Just mix it up. I'm not sure that that's the best approach, but it seemed like an interesting way to kind of mix up the
And
influence there.
And I think it achieves two things. It's you're both meeting them where they're at, and it's introducing these ideas in a playful format, which is
Yeah.
always when you get a better
Yeah.
reception, you know?
Yeah. If you're really
Yeah.
serious and all media is bad, as you know, they just tune you out.
Right, right. So we have to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to dive deeper into self image, social media, and this really handy acronym for a tool that Dr. Charlotte Markey first introduced in Psychology Today. Did you know anyone in a U.S. state, territory, or tribe who needs suicide or mental health related crisis support, or who has a loved one in crisis, can connect with a trained counselor by calling or texting 988? 988 is the easy to remember number that reaches what is commonly referred to as the Lifeline, a network of more than 200 state and local call centers funded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Formerly known as the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the full name has changed to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. 988. It's the 911 for mental health. My guest is Dr. Charlotte Markey, a mom of two who has a vested interest in the way tweens and teens' self-image formation is being affected by online use and images. The book she most recently published is most definitely a family affair. One of the co-authors is her husband. So totally off topic, but how was that?
Well, I can definitely say my husband and I have different working styles. Um, so, I like to do everything really in advance, and I have a schedule for my writing projects, and he likes to do everything at the last minute. And so I got a little tense a few times, but he's a great writer, and he's very critical of anything that I put together. And, sometimes it's nice when you're working on any kind of, I think, creative project. You need people who will tell you the truth.
Yes. So
that
hard to hear, but it is such it's valuable feedback.
Yeah, you just need people who are like, oh, that doesn't sound good, or that doesn't make sense, or people aren't going to like that.
Mm-hmm.
So he's great for that.
Yeah. And different working styles, I often feel like they really do end up complementing each other. So yay.
For sure.
But yeah, I thought that was fun to see.
Yeah.
Okay. In chapter 10, the title is Making a Difference. And in this chapter, you talk about being the change and having reasons for hope, as well as you have just what I think like our audience would really value is you have these 2 pages of positive body image resources. And so I wanted to flesh out with you, what was the criteria for kind of like making the cut of these influencers to make these 2 pages?
That's a good question. And, I'm really lucky because I'm a professor and I work with undergraduates. So a lot of young people in their late teens and early 20s. And they've been involved in all of my book projects, and they read and help me. And so this was something they helped with.
So that totally makes sense to me because it's a hip read. Like there's like it's very relevant. And I was thinking like, oh, wow, like you've really got your finger on the pulse here. So it makes
well, that too, of course.
Yeah, of course.
No, yes. I mean, and my students, were pretty comfortable. And they also, I think, typically, some of them will work with me for years. And so they get pretty good at saying like, no, this is, not the right tone, or kids won't like this. And I do a lot of focus grouping with the material. So I ask the target readership to read it. And that really helps too, because again, I think just it has to be an iterative process when you're trying to get evidence-based information to people. You have to make it accessible and palatable in a way that they'll actually then read it.
Right.
But in terms of like the influencer list, that started, I think, mostly with my students going online. Some of them I knew people I follow. So my, social media space probably looks really different than the average person's, and that so much of it is related to my work. And there are people who are, mental health professionals and body positive sort of influencers. So some of the people I know from my own experiences, but most of it is just my research assistants. Then also looking for people who put out consistent, positive, really mental health messages, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's so important to really kind of vet your influencers on social media, because there's a whole lot of advice being thrown out there from very non-credentialed individuals. So that's why I appreciated this sort of vetted list from you, where people can like see, oh, okay, these actually are body positive folks and are going to be talking about healthy things, not, engaging in challenges and things that can lead to harm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, there's more and more of these people out there. And so I think, some of what's really important as we parent is to make sure they realize sort of the diversity of influences and try to get them to connect with some of these positive influences. We know that really matters.
I totally agree. And I think this is a really great segue into this whole concept of media literacy and becoming media literate with this generation. And it's kind of a bit amorphous, and it depends on what corner of online life you're talking about. But if we are like sticking to the social media realm, because it's Healthy Screen Habits podcast, what are the things that you would use to define media literacy?
Yeah, you're right. It's sort of a vague term at times, but I think media literacy really is being critical, right? So if we had to just provide a simple definition of media literacy, it's approaching the media you use with a critical eye and not accepting everything you see as truth, right? I think as we get older, we get better at this because we have more life experience. But young people, the default is not necessarily to be critical. The default is to assume that if someone has a platform, if someone's in a commercial even, that then someone must have vetted it somewhere, right? That there's someone somewhere that's like regulating the information being provided. And unfortunately, that's just simply not true in most spaces, especially when it comes to social media.
Yeah. And so you have a whole section on becoming media literate, and you talk about this emphasis on, like you said, applying kind of a critical eye. And you talk about also the importance of paying attention to why images are presented the way they are and paying attention to the way they make you feel, which I think is really, really important. So, I am a lover of acronyms as mnemonic devices, and you have a great one. When we're talking about taking steps to buffer kind of negative effects from the media, you use this acronym of FACE. And can we go over that?
Yeah, I would love to. So that the F in FACE stands for filtering. And this always throws people because it's a completely different filtering than most people are used to thinking of. And it really comes from protective filtering, which is a phrase that body image scientists use. And protective filtering means that we need to protect ourselves from harmful influences on our mental health and our body image in particular by filtering those influences out. And so if there are people we're following, let's say on Instagram, and we realize that when we see what they're sharing, we always kind of feel bad, right? Then we want to just filter them out. We want to get rid of those things. It doesn't mean, again, that we get rid of all of it necessarily, but we need to just filter it. And I sometimes talk about having an experience in my early adulthood where this first became apparent to me long before this phrase protective filtering existed. And I remember being, a young woman and like getting the Victoria's Secret catalog in the mail, like with some regularity. It felt like they were just always showing up. And I would look at it and think like, I will just never look anything like this. And I would feel terrible about, these women with these ridiculous proportions looking so amazing. And then I remember having this realization one day that like, I just don't have to look at this anymore. I can just, as soon as it comes, throw it out.
Yeah.
And it was really freeing. And I know it's a really silly example and no one gets catalogs anymore. But
No, I think it's relatable. Yeah.
It's the same concept. Like, don't open it, throw it out.
Yeah.
And you may be amazed at how freeing that is because it does protect you when you filter out those influences.
Yeah. And I think, we spend some time talking about the importance of letting the algorithms work for you,
Yeah,
where,
100%.
and if you are intentionally blocking these triggering feeds for you, or these feeds that you're no longer feeling are serving you, if you are continually blocking them, the algorithms will no longer keep sending them to you. So this goes back to circle it back around. It kind of goes back to that whole concept of media literacy, which is this, wiggly term. But I think that protective filtering phrase is really important. So that's the F in face. You want to take us through A?
Yeah. So A is avoiding. And again, I never ever tell people with media, like, you need to avoid it altogether, because I think that's completely unrealistic. And especially with young people, because there are benefits in terms of social connection and education and information that come from even social media. But we do need to set some boundaries. And so we need to avoid social media sometimes. And as parents, we can help our kids do that. Whether it be no phones at the dinner table, for God's sake, or, no phones in your room at night, which is a battle I keep losing as a parent, I will admit. But, whatever those parameters are, sometimes if I'm driving a kid somewhere, I say, no, off your phone, you have to talk to me. And I think that that's really important to just have that freedom also that's brought to you by just avoiding all of it for even little bits of time, even if it's not a full day. And there is some really interesting research that speaks to the benefits of this, and that when teens are sometimes in part of research projects asked to avoid social media, they report feeling better and again, kind of relieved. It's like someone else tells you you can't do this. And so they don't. And they don't have to create those boundaries for themselves. And it's just kind of a relief to have less mental space being occupied.
Yeah. It's that setting up of the guardrails that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, think how stressful it is to drive on an unmarked road.
Right.
Or on a road where they're doing construction and the lines have gotten all cattywampus and you're looking and going, where do I go? Where do I go? We have to remember that avoiding or that setting that boundaries is just simply putting up boundaries, setting up those K rails so that our kids can go, okay, this is the line I drive in.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And how about C? So we've got filtering, avoiding, which is the same as setting boundaries, and then C in face.
So C is for careful of comparisons. And what I often like to say is, if we use social media and our response to it was, oh, that's so great, she looks wonderful, or she just got a new car, I'm so happy for her. If our response to looking at what other people were doing and looking like on social media was just this sort of positive sense of like, oh, I'm so happy for them, right? Then I don't really know that social media would be all that problematic. But instead, what we tend to do is we immediately compare ourselves. It's just a very human impulse. It doesn't mean we're bad people. It's what everyone does. We tend to compare. And so we see someone looking amazing or doing something exciting, and we feel lesser than them. And careful of comparisons is a reminder, who are you comparing yourself to? Right? Because so many of those people making us feel bad are not good comparisons in the first place. It's ridiculous, right? I mean, if you have a celebrity or an influencer with, a lighting guy and a personal chef and a stylist and whatever it may be, like those are not our peers, the average person. Like it's ridiculous to think we would be comparing ourselves to these people and then feeling bad about it.
Right, right. And I have found that it's funny, this comparison thing. I think, was it Roosevelt who said comparison is the thief of joy? Mm-hmm. I have found that I go through kind of phases where sometimes there are feeds that I'm really interested in, I like. And then other times, those same feeds are the ones that I find myself getting wrapped up. I don't know if it's what's going on in my own life or what, but that's when I start doing the comparison thing. So sometimes just hitting that mute button on the social media can help you regulate that as well.
Yeah. And I think just remember too, that a lot of what we see, these are people who it's their job to look good and to be sharing fabulous content. Like that's their job. Right. And our job, is to live a very full and varied life. That's not all we do with our days. And so I think when you allow yourself to really think about like, who am I comparing myself to, and filter it out, but kind of keeping that perspective.
Yeah. And remembering that we're seeing highlight reels that,
of course,
that particularly if we go back to body image and boys, we're seeing pictures that guys are presenting after the workout. It's when they're the most pumped up and glistening and all of that. It's not, they're just rolled out of bed photos.
For sure. Right.
Yeah.
And even the ones that people are pretending they just rolled out of bed or whatever, a lot of times that's not the reality either. So
right. So we've got filtering, avoiding comparison, and take us into E for face.
E is really evaluating. And this is some of what we talked about when we talked about media literacy. We really need to look at what we're seeing on social media with a critical eye and evaluate it, and evaluate, why is someone sharing it? How is it making me feel? And oftentimes, what are they selling? And there's just, as we know, a lot of product placement, a lot of branding, a lot of ulterior motives. And I know it sounds kind of cynical and conspiratorial to bring up, but it's the reality is that, this is market driven partly. So we need to really evaluate what we're seeing, again, in order to protect our own sense of self.
I agree. So thank you for sharing all the F, the A, the C, and the E. And we have to take a short break, but when we come back, I am going to ask Dr. Markey for her healthy screen habit. U.S. listeners, listen up. There are 2 Senate bills that would provide the most robust new online protections for children in nearly 25 years, and they are now at a pivotal moment. We need your help to help get them passed. The Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA, and the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPA, have the potential to make the digital world much safer for young people by banning surveillance advertising to children, holding big tech accountable for exploiting kids through bad design, and more. Earlier this year, the bills were advanced by Senate Commerce Committee and now have the potential to be voted on by the full Senate before midterm elections in November. That's where you come in. We need you to call your senators, email your senators for support in these essential bills. Urge your senators to push these bills to the finish line and vote yes to support and protect American kids and teens from big tech's exploitive business model. My guest today is a world leading expert in body image research. Today, we've listened to her share just a few things that can be found in her latest book, Being You, the Body Image Book for Boys. For the purpose of this episode, I've focused on healthy screen habits and online resources, but I assure you there are so much more information about all things boy in this book. So, Charlotte, on every episode, I ask each guest for a healthy screen habit. And this is a tip or takeaway that listeners can put into practice in their own home. Do you have a healthy screen habit to share with us today?
Yeah. So I don't know if it's a habit in that it's not the sort of thing you do every day necessarily. It's not that sort of a habit. But one thing I really like to recommend that I think is really valuable that I have done is as a parent to sit down with your tween or teen and just ask them to show you their newsfeed. Just sort of sit there with them, and maybe it's a minute, maybe it's a half hour even, but ask questions, let them tell you who people are, kind of get on their level, ask why they're following people, and have a conversation. Because I think that as parents, we're all too quick to just try to set boundaries, get kids to, listen to us, but we don't really engage with their content. And when we kind of, talk to them about who are they interested in, who is that musical artist? Like, I mean, I don't know who a lot of these people are at this point in my life, right? That my kids find so interesting. But kids like to be the expert. And so they get to tell you who they're interested in, why they're following them. And you get to raise sort of some critiques then as the parent too, if you're careful about it, and say like, oh, well, why are you following that person? Or that doesn't seem like authentic information. Or oh, I really like, that person's music, or whatever it may be, but just sort of engage them in learning about their social media world by letting them show you. And I think that it can do a lot for your relationship with your kid too, to just understand the media, the celebrities, the people that they like. Yeah, and it can be fun.
Yeah, for sure. I love this for many reasons. For one, I love that you're coming from a place of curiosity, and coming from a place of curiosity tends to withhold judgment. So I think our kids are so hypersensitized to, they're not going to like this, they're going to make me stop or whatever, I mean, I think coming
Right.
from a place of curiosity is like a really just great place to start conversation. And
Yeah.
I also like that, one of the things that I think it's important that we just remember and remember and remember is that these talks about technology have to be ongoing, and they have to be kind of just lots of little talks all the time. It's like sipping
Yeah.
water to stay hydrated. You
Yeah.
can't drink a gallon of water on Wednesday and think you're going to be fine on Saturday. So it's just lots of sips of water. But all of those tech talks don't have to be porn is bad. You're
Right.
watching, you're playing too many video games, you're doing this, you're doing that. But engaging in this way, you're still allowing time for these conversations in tech about technology, but doing so in a more, like I said, like playful, engaging, informational seeking kind of a way. I love this habit. It's a great one.
Yeah. And, I do find too that I'm surprised sometimes once you get a teenager talking about, the musical artists they like, or the actors or actresses they like, or whatever they're into, that, you learn something. I feel so out of touch with popular culture when I'm talking to teenagers. So it's kind of fun to learn from them, but it's also just, I think, really great to understand sort of their world in that way.
Right. Because
And
I think a lot of times, many of the artists that are being followed in this generation, it's been my experience at least, are people who are standing for social change or representation in areas that I'm really proud of the reason why my children are supporting these artists and, and promoting with the like cultural change or that, I mean, and so I'm like, oh, this is bigger than just, this is cool,
Yeah.
But when you ask the short question, it's, oh, it's cool. But it's like, it takes time to sit and kind of tease out.
I know. I was shocked. I think the first time I did this with my daughter, I realized she was following a couple of politicians and she was, 12 or something. And I thought, I didn't know about any politicians when I was 12, I don't think.
Right.
I mean, I didn't really have a political identity until I was almost 30, perhaps. So I think it's really amazing that young people have exposure to some of this information. And that's the upside of technology and media, is that I do think young people have access to some good information too. And we don't want to forget that. And we want to kind of encourage it. We want to talk to them about it.
Completely. And it all circles back to that media literacy, just like you were talking about. Okay. As always, a complete transcript of this episode, as well as links to any of the books mentioned, can be found in today's show notes. You can find these on healthyscreenhabits.org. Click on the podcast button and use the drop-down menu to find this episode. Charlotte, I can't thank you enough for being here as we head into fall, and hope that any parent of a middle school boy who's looking for answers or a tool to help their child move through this next stage of development will be sure to check out your book.
Please do. I really think we need to just encourage more conversation about mental health and health in general among boys too.
I love it. Yes, I could not agree with you more. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more information, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Healthy Screen Habits. Make sure to visit our website, healthyscreenhabits.org, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or via RSS, so you'll never miss an episode. It's free, it's fun, and you get a healthy new screen habit each week. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate you giving us a quick rating. It really does help other people find us and spread the word of healthy screen habits. Or if you'd simply like to tell a friend, we'd love that too. I so appreciate you spending your time with me this week, and I look forward to learning more healthy habits together.